All right, accursed out there, we're back. Your friendly Curse of Politics panel for the Ontario election. Scott Reid, Deb Hutton, Jordan Leichnitz here bright and early on a Monday morning to break everything that's Canadian political down for you with an emphasis on the Ontario election as much as we can. Scott, did you watch the game?
I did. I have never been as disinterested in the Super Bowl, I think, in my entire adult life. I can't stand Philadelphia teams. Philadelphia fans are animals. They should be in jail, every single one of them, so I don't root for Philly. Kansas City and Mahomes, I hate that team. I didn't want to see them three-peat, so I had nothing to cheer for. But I became obsessed over the course of the weekend. I don't know if you guys were online constantly like I was and getting into this, but, you know, you've got the whole Kendrick Drake thing, which takes you into diss tracks, which takes you into Timothy Chalamet, which takes you into Dylan. You must
be so disappointed. I forgot.
Crazy musical.
You had yourself talked into the fact that Bob Dylan. Did you watch the halftime show?
I was convinced.
What would Bob Dylan have done in that?
Bob Dylan was going to come out and he was going to have a red, white, and blue jacket on, and he was going to for the first time appear at the Super Bowl. I was convinced. I had worked myself into a lather about this. This is, I think, the world's biggest Dylan fan. And then it didn't happen. And my oldest son was sending out text messages and WhatsApp threads and laughing and taking pictures of the screen and just completely killing himself, saying, I can't believe the old man thought Dylan was coming to share the stage with Kendrick. You're so feeble and stupid now, Dad. You can't even feed yourself. So that was my biggest disappointment of the weekend.
I only followed for the Taylor Swift subplot trolling Donald Trump, so that was good.
You weren't there for the Kendrick beating on Drake?
No, I was definitely more there for the Taylor Swift energy. It was good, you know. She handles being booed better than a lot of people, better than the president.
You know, Deb, this show's not controversial enough, so I'm just going to say this: rap is boring live.
I didn't think it was a great halftime show. I mean, Samuel L. Jackson, what the hell was that? It was just weird. The only thing I liked was when the dancers sort of went into the American flag. I thought that was kind of cool. Yeah. But other than that, I didn't like it at all. Ads were fun. Ads were very fun, such as we saw them from here in Canada.
So speaking of which,
welcome back to White as Salt Radio. Our next guest is Dick Van Dyke.
There were political ads on the Super Bowl, the Canadian simulcast of it. There was two pro Doug Ford spots from the Conservatives, and there was a negative Ford spot and a negative positive healthcare spot from Crombie. So maybe we should start off our show with the data, because last week we saw some movement in the underliers that promised surely some interesting movement in the top line.
Right. Let's have it.
No, I cannot give it to you. I cannot give it to you.
Just tormenting us this morning.
Yes, I know. The truth of the matter is, the Ford PCs had a good weekend. So, since it's Monday, let's take you through a little bit more detail than normal look at what we're gathering overnight. And so I'll start with today's Relay Strategies polling is brought to you by Enbridge Gas, reliable, affordable natural gas to heat your homes and power our economy. So thank you to Enbridge for sponsoring Kyler Rennell and Fitch and Relay for this polling. And here's what we find. So before you get into allocating undecided voters, if you include undecided voters, the situation is 44 Ford PC, 20 Crombie Liberal, 15 Styles NDP, 7 Schreiner Green, and 15% undecided. When you allocate the undecided, so before people excitedly report wrong numbers to people or numbers that don't, or apples to oranges, The decided vote is 51 Ford PC, 23 Crombie Liberal, 18 Stiles NDP, and 8 Schreiner Green. Right track, wrong track for the province, 36 right track, 64 wrong track. If the election was held today, the issue most important to your vote would be the cost of living, 57%. Dealing with Trump, 19%. Down from a peak of 27 last Tuesday. Education, 2%. Healthcare, 18%, its highest number of the campaign. Something else, 4%. Favorable, unfavorable for the leaders. Favorable Ford, 43. Unfavorable, 40. Favorable for Crombie, 28. Unfavorable, 31. Favorable for Stiles, 24. Unfavorable, 25. Schreiner, favorable, 18. Unfavorable, 22. Which party would be best to handle each of the following issues? Cost of living, 45% Ford, 29% Stiles, 26% Crombie.
Ooh.
Dealing with Trump, 56% Ford, 25% Crombie, 19% Stiles. Education, 41% Ford. Read it and weep. 30% Stiles, 29% Crombie. Healthcare, cover your ears. Ford, 38. Stiles, 31. Crombie, 30. Helping people like you. Ford, 43. Stiles, 32. Crombie, 25. Do you agree or disagree it's time for a change in government in Ontario? Agree. Strongly agree, 46%. Somewhat agree, 21%. Somewhat disagree, 13. Strongly disagree, 12. Deb, you've seen a lot of data. What do you think?
A lot of data. So we're at the halfway point, I think, give or take. My math isn't great, but roughly that's where we are, and the numbers haven't moved. And Washington happens tomorrow. Ford's got a big speech, and presumably we're getting some aluminum and steel tariffs today, which will put the tariff issue right front and center. So it's a good day for conservatives, let me tell you.
Right. So, having spent months and months putting the focus on better customer outcomes in wireline internet, I give you a shift to how we can affect better health outcomes. So let me take you listeners to the not too distant past, when our entire health history and medical records were in our own heads or on scraps of disjointed notes, and maybe in the files of one provider. Remember how it was kind of a crapshoot to accurately communicate what might be critical information to other doctors or care providers. Have you ever taken such and such medication? Maybe. I think I have. What was the dosage? I don't remember. Well, our presenting sponsor, TELUS Health, has had a massive impact here in Canada and around the world on diagnosing and curing that problem. Proudly Canadian, TELUS Health operates in 167 countries and counting. They've grown to be a leader in health data interoperability, and today they provide electronic medical records to more than 36,000 clinicians. Their recent collaboration with Nova Scotia Health to enable residents access to their medical information is a pretty great case study in the benefits. It's one of the first large-scale efforts in Canada to standardize and connect primary care data, giving people the power to better manage their health and improve their outcomes. In practical terms, it means patients have seamless and secure access to their own health information. I would say any tool that helps us convey information to keep ourselves in good health is always welcome. But sometimes, as we know, situations become acute, and the need to communicate medical history instantly, accurately, efficiently with clinicians and care providers becomes even more critical. And this is just scratching the surface of how TELUS Health can help. Stay tuned. Jordan, give me a first reaction.
Yeah, I mean, I'm struck a bit to the degree to which it looks like the Liberals have stalled a bit in some of the core issues in terms of the who's best. So I think obviously we've seen some top line movement where they've leapfrogged ahead of the NDP for about the last week. But it doesn't seem to be like breakaway momentum. And when you look at those issue underliers, you're still seeing a pretty strong performance for Styles above Crombie on some of those core issues. And I think the ones that I would look at particularly are on the affordability issue. Again, bearing in mind that cost of living is by a long shot, cost of living is still the top issue. And the people like you, that's actually, I think that measure is so interesting because often it's a bit of a proxy for how people are connecting to a leader or not connecting to a leader, especially in a time of economic uncertainty. So I think that under the hood there's still very much something for the NDP to work with and to build on some strengths. And it's interesting to me that despite some of that top line movement, you're not seeing that like a strong breakaway from the Liberals at all in these numbers.
Scott?
Well, I'd be interested to know if there's even marginal movement between the NDP and Liberals, either top line or in the underlying issues. It feels to me like really it's all margin of error. Nothing.
It's tracking, bumping along
Just
largely.
bumping along, yeah.
So nothing's happening there. And so what I'm struck by is the fact that you've got this giant time for change number, and none of it is reflected in any of the other measures. So it's not reflected in how you intend to vote, and it's not even reflected in how you assess the core issues. Like what is it that people are so goddamn anxious to change then? Like if they think that Ford is best to manage healthcare and education. And so it goes back to something we've talked about a bunch of times, which is I don't think either the opposition parties or both combined opposition parties have made an effective case for change. And, the sad truth may be that it's not possible in a crowded campaign period that's very short. And I say crowded because Trump is in it. The feds are in it. Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland are in it. Snowstorms are in it. Like maybe it's just not possible to make that case for change. But it looks to me like because you wouldn't bet a dime that the Conservatives would be able to literally split down the middle their opposition 3 elections in a row. But right now, it looks like you're going to end up with Crombie and Styles in a tie, with the NDP and the Liberals in a tie statistically, and Ford running away. And that's the 3rd time in a row that's happened.
Scott, can I just take you back? They're going to end up with no seats. They're going to be tied without party status. There's only going to be one party that has party status at the end of this election campaign, the way it is going. Let's be serious about what 51 to 23 actually means. It means everything.
Right. So
am I wrong, Deb?
No, I think you're absolutely right. Now, do I think it'll even out a little bit and the Liberals and the New Democrats will get smart and focus on sort of a very few number of ridings very intensively to try and get them over that hump? But I think you're 100% right. Can I just say, too, it is, I think, possible to have a strong feeling of time for change. My life's not going so well. I blame government. Yeah, I'd like a change. But holy crap, I don't want to do it right now with that crazy Donald Trump guy. So I think 2 things can be true. I want to stick with the horse I know, and it would be nice to have change. One just overtakes the other.
Right.
I wonder if time for a change is really just an echo of the federal scene.
Could be. Or just anti-government
I'm not sure
sentiment.
about that, though.
The question is I just want to say the question is very precisely about Ontario. That doesn't mean people couldn't answer
And I also think
but
like the other clue to that is still the really high proportion of people in Ontario who don't find the election justified, even among PC voters.
But it's not motivating them, Jordan.
I agree. Yeah. I agree with that. I agree it's not motivating them. But if I were to look under the hood to understand if that time for a change was genuinely tied to Ontario, I'd say that's another thing to look at. That's a sign of unhappiness with some of these decisions. So there is something there. It's just not mobilizing people to shift their ballot. vote right
So
now.
it takes me to two things. One is you can't do three things if your Styles or Crombie. You can't afford to do one and a half things. You have to do one thing. You just have to prosecute. So I would take all of my paid, and you got to treat this as moving week. So I would backload all my paid, every dollar. And we've talked about this before, but now it feels even more urgent, more essential. All of my paid, I'd make it all negative, and I would try to tag forward. And I would go hard negative on healthcare over and over and over again. Tell people what they already feel, tell people what they believe. I do it toward the end of the week. And you got to hope that somebody watches the debate and that you actually perform well in debate and you actually are able to pop through. I don't know what other moments are there. What other levers are there to tug on if you're an opposition leader between now and election day?
Jordan, do you agree with that? That there's no point in saving your advertising dollars for the last week when people are making up their minds? I think they've made up their minds, and it has to be changed.
Yeah, I think, well, and as we talked about last week, and my prescription is maybe more for the NDP, but it's like when you are neck and neck like this, you have to create the impression of some sort of breakaway, even if that's not authentically happening in the numbers yet. You have to show some momentum, and you can buy that. And I think that's a very reasonable thing to do right now, because that could get you space in the latter part of the campaign, where you will, your fundraising will also come in, like you're going to backfill that. But it's a bit, I think, for both the Liberals and the NDP, unless they can shift that tie dynamic, then we're gonna knife fight this thing to a draw, right? And that means that's more numbers for Ford, right? Because of how those vote splits work. So, yeah, I mean, I think the other thing I would look at is going back to some of those issue questions. It's important. So, the Liberals and Crombie, they've gone all in on health, and we can debate whether that is working for them. But, I think that generally they've been following Scott's prescription with a few deviations and staying on that issue. And I think actually for the NDP, they've had a bit of a renewed focus on the affordability issue over the last few days, where they've been drumming that one pretty hard. I think that's good for them. I would continue. I would dig in on that. The underlying numbers there is something there for them. It's something that connects with Mart's leadership, and they've got some strength there. And I would build there. That's where I would put my stakes down and my money down, and try to get out ahead on that topic.
Okay, so we may be in a trade war, or we may not. Blanket tariffs may yet be imposed on Canadian exports, or they may not. Or maybe this is all just the opening round of a larger negotiation. Forgotten in the heat of the past couple of weeks is the fact that Canada is part of a trade treaty with the United States. Canadians call it CUSMA, the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement. It is the rules-based order for trillions of dollars of continental trade, and it is a very big deal. Our sponsor, CN, has been crucial in enabling it, linking suppliers and customers from coast to southern coast. After he signed the treaty, President Trump called it, quote, the fairest, most balanced, and beneficial trade agreement we have ever signed into law, end quote. That was 5 years ago. The agreement is up for review next year, and from the looks of it, the U.S. wants some changes. Fair enough. But CN, with respect, would like to cite a few passages from the White House's own website. On the site, you can look it up, it's right there. The Office of the President calls the free trade agreement, quote, a mutually beneficial win for North American workers, farmers, ranchers, and businesses. It talks about having created, quote, more balanced, reciprocal trade supporting high-paying jobs for Americans and grow the North American economy. The site goes on to provide a dense slurry of statistics in support of free, untariffed trade. And CN agrees wholeheartedly. The railway, like most other American and Canadian businesses, has shaped its operations based on the agreement and its predecessors, going right back to January 1st, 1989. It has been steady, beneficial progress. Win, win, win. By all means, let's review the treaty and renew it. Deb, it's an alternative universe.
Okay.
And you find yourself at the NDP Monday meeting. Morning meeting, not the Monday meeting, the morning meeting.
Yep.
Right? And they read through
And
this
you're
data.
wearing that $800,000 wristwatch that Tom Brady had on at the Super Bowl. And you're like, morning, losers. How's it going?
And somebody takes you through this data. And what you hear is that you're at 18 points. But the number of people in Ontario who think you are best to deal with cost of living is 29 points. And the percentage of people who think you're best to deal with education is 30 points. And the people who think you're best to deal with healthcare is 31 points. And the number of people who think you're best to help people like them is 32 points. Why do you conclude you're at 18 points?
Leader, volume of message, and not enough focus. I mean, this morning, I think Mard is out doing a grocery rebate, which is a humongous cost. I mean, she just rolls out the money day after day.
Wait a minute.
Yes.
Can we talk about the tunnel?
You keep talking about cost.
There is that.
Jesus.
You keep
It's
talking
operating,
about
it's
fully
infrastructure
costed
capital. Come on.
Like,
No, but these
talk
are
about
big
an
ticket
alternate
items.
universe.
Come on.
These are big ticket items. The rent control last week so I actually think she's on the right track in the last few days. I do think it is on your side, which is their campaign bus. I also think though what they need to do, as I said a few moments ago, you got to figure out what are the top 10, maybe max, maybe 12 ridings, and just focus on that. 100%. It's true. Like you need to salvage party status.
Right.
Otherwise,
NDP
you're
have done
toast.
that part though. They're too.
Scott, why are they-
Yeah, I think
But don't ignore my question, because I like my question.
Yes.
Right? What? And I'm not saying you did.
On your side.
I'm not
On your
saying you
side.
did. Scott, why did the NDP run 10 to 15 points behind their competency in terms of vote intent?
I think brand. I think it's the NDP brand in Ontario. I think that their ceiling is naturally, or not ceiling, but I think their zone is 20% in Ontario at 20 is around 20, and that's their natural zone. And so to break out of it, you have to be doing something that gets noticed, or your leader has to be rising above the earth. And I hear from people all the time that when you do focus groups, and I know there's from other parties too, and you show them Mart in action, people go, I like, she looks appealing to me, but literally no one has seen her. And so
is she Jagmeet? Is she actually running as Jagmeet? I mean, well, let me just say,
Right.
and I see heads are shaking, but the fact of the matter
I misunderstood your question.
The fact of the matter is that the Singh and the federal NDP, after a long period of weakness, now appear to be fucking disappearing in the wake of the Trudeau resignation and Carney reemergence. And so one of the things I would question is whether the federal situation is dragging Styles under the water.
For sure. I agree with that. I thought you meant, is she acting like Singh or whatever? But no, I think that's part to me of the brand. That's why the answer is the brand, right? The brand's wrapped up in him and the feds and all that. And I think it's artificially depressed for him.
I think her challenge is different though. Like Singh's problem really is that he,
Sucks.
Okay, all right.
But what
I'm
I'm suggesting, Jordan, what I'm suggesting is not that she and Singh have the same problems, but that fundamentally nobody knows who she is, and they do know who he is.
Yeah, I think that's true. And he's still struggling with some negatives after the confidence supply agreement that have not rebounded. And that could have an impact for sure. But whereas I think that the issue with Marit is just people don't know her. They don't know who she is. When they see her, they do generally like her, but they just haven't seen her. So that's, I think, a different challenge there.
Right. Last week, we heard from the Ontario Real Estate Association, or OREA, about how the Canadian dream of home ownership is slipping further out of reach for everyday Ontario families due to the lack of housing supply and prohibitive government costs driving up home prices. OREA's provincial election platform, A Home for Everyone 2025, offers ideas on how to rescue the dream of home ownership by focusing on 3 priority areas. Number 1, better consumer protections by eliminating the backlog at the Landlord and Tenant Board and mandating equal treatment for diverse families under the Condo Act. Number 2, building 1.5 million homes by 2031 by ending exclusionary zoning to allow 4plexes province-wide and increasing density near transit through building conversions. Number 3, lowering the cost of owning a home by limiting municipal development charges and allowing a multiple ownership model for housing options like duplexes and triplexes. The housing crisis won't be solved overnight, but Oria believes the next provincial government can take important steps towards restoring the dream of home ownership. For Oria's full election platform, head to oria.com/platform. All right, let's do our do-overs of the day. So that's where we each take our party and say what something they should do that they haven't done, or something that they did do that they shouldn't have done. Deb, go first.
So both the Liberals and the New Democrats last week pledged to double ODSP, the Ontario Disability Support Plan. And the Premier was asked about that. No surprise, you would be ready for that kind of question. And he had a bit of a clumsy pivot to Ontario Works.
Yeah,
and
a bit clumsy.
He talked about able-bodied people sitting on the couch watching the Flintstones. So not the best reference, not the most current reference. But the bigger issue was he was actually talking about those on Ontario Works, not those on ODSP. But because he put the two together in a clumsy, as I said, pivot, people got talking about the fact that, he was telling people with disabilities they needed to get off the couch and work. So could have been handled better for a question that you knew was coming.
Very awkward echo of his comments a decade ago about autistic kids. He does sometimes, when the mask slips, say these kinds of things that make you go,
Why don't those crippled people get up off the couch?
That is
I think
so
the answer's
not
in
what
your
he
question,
said.
sir.
Doug Ford remains the biggest threat to Doug Ford.
Jordan, do over.
This one's going out to the federal NDP, who are headed into another week of tariff news where it is just going to be an absolute knife fight to get noticed. And I would like them to take a little inspiration from Charlie Angus's anti-Trump energy. So there was a lot of really smart and important policy responses to the tariffs. And it's great that they know what those are, but they need to connect emotionally. And there is a real space, I think, for the NDP to take up on this that Charlie is currently inhabiting really, really well, which is just one of outrage and also pointing out the kind of complete hypocrisy coming from the Conservatives on this topic. So, you've got Poilievre out there, won't commit to a bailout plan for workers. This guy, has been endorsed by Elon Musk. There's so much to work with there. And it's a space that the federal Liberals and Carney are going to struggle to occupy because he's going to be stepping immediately into the Prime Minister's shoes, and he's got a bit of a different task. Well, there's not a lot of danger of that happening for the federal NDP right now. So that means that you get to pick a different path and give voice to some of those concerns and that anger and those feelings on the left side of the spectrum. So I would encourage the federal party to be a little less policy heavy and be a little more emotive on this issue and take up that space. Don't let that be grabbed by somebody else.
All right. Makes sense to me. Scott.
Whenever someone says to me, be more emotive, I think, oh, wait, isn't the word emotional? And then I pause and suddenly I'm in my head and I'm not feeling emotional at all or emotive.
Emoji.
I think you emote very well, Scott, all the time.
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
Unless you're someone I care about. My redo is for the Liberals. Obviously, my redo is Super Bowl. I thought it was great that they rolled the dice, took two spots, spent the money, generated some earned media off of that. But just as we've been talking about all pod, you don't have the luxury of doing one and a half things. And I thought that the healthcare ad was, as you kind of mentioned in passing, David, a clever blend of negative and positive. It's hard on Ford about the state of healthcare, saying the things that people experience and believe in the province, but it also made a point of showing Bonnie and profiling her, which obviously needs to occur as we look at these numbers. And I would not have diluted that with the hot mic ad. I think that was a waste of resources. You don't have the luxury anymore of doing two things. That was, to me, I would have put all my chips on the healthcare ad, the healthcare / Bonnie ad, and I would have run it twice and tried to increase the number of people that might see, connect, or be noticed, notice it. So I think going forward, on a smaller scale, on an individual scale, and an item by item, you got to be applying that logic. If this feels like we're doing two things, don't convince yourself, well, you know what, we're going to do this because of that, but then we'll be doing this other thing over here. There's no here and there. You have no fucking eyeballs on you. You can only do one thing. You've got to like literally get up into the lighthouse and beam that light everywhere all the time. You got one thing, man. Just do one thing.
You know, I really think the Liberals are at a strategic fork in the road. And I think because I'm coming to believe that education is not going to drive this election campaign in any significant number. It's not education, healthcare. Healthcare is not going to drive this election campaign in any significant way that will change the outcome from the way it's going right now. It just doesn't seem like it's going to get that kind of momentum as an issue as things are going. So if you're the Liberals, you have to say, well, not all cards have been played yet. There is a debate yet to go. And so let's ride this through. Let's keep driving this positioning, hope that we really break through in the debate, and then ride that momentum into a respectable showing on E-Day. I think that's a very high-risk strategy, which mostly depends on winning the debate. And so you have to be clear-eyed with yourself about what your prospects of getting a clean win out of the debate are. And the other thing, when I look at it, is this election can't really have much to do with any issues that the opposition party can affect. So I would be awfully tempted to turn my guns and say the thing that has to be killed here is Doug Ford. So this election is not about healthcare, and it's not about cost of living. It's about Ford, because I think negative on Ford and on his character might be the only thing left that might penetrate in this campaign. And I worry that another 2.5 weeks of pouring money into healthcare is not going to yield anything.
What would that attack be? What does it look like in an ad or a clip? Like, you're just saying he's a fucker, or like, I mean, what's the window into the critique? That's obviously a research driven fact, but we know two things. We know that people from the polling are overwhelmingly inclined to agree with the soft corruption story about Ford, right? That there's a lot of helping of friends that goes on in this administration. So that's one possible area. I think Deb alluded to another possible area about the kinds of things he says off the cuff about people like people on disability or people with autism, etc. I mean, I don't know. I'm desperate.
Yeah.
But we are looking at a complete wipeout on the current trajectory.
But would you worry that the NDP would scoop some of that if those negatives, like, it's so close now? I mean, I would think that would be a potential because of Crombie's kind of underlying weakness on some of those issues. Does it just drive people elsewhere?
So Bonnie was out yesterday, I guess in lieu of being out herself, and talking about a new investigation into the Greenbelt and Ontario Place. And I just thought, what a waste of time, energy, and air to even talk about that. And so maybe they're already taking your strategy, David. I don't know. But my reaction to that was if the soft corruption stuff had worked, Mart Stiles would be better known than she is today, because she hammered that day in, day out when she was the one with the opposition microphone and Bonnie Crombie wasn't, and got nowhere. People just is sort of like, yeah, but I may lose my job because of Donald Trump. Yeah, but my affordability may go through even worse times because of Donald Trump. Again, there's a lot that people will say, but I don't think it is motivating them when it comes to who they're going to vote for.
That's probably right, Deb. But Jesus, what are you supposed to do? Just lay down and die?
I'm kind of with Scott. Like, I think healthcare, very targeted, very strong. There's an underlying message. I actually wanted to ask Scott about this.
Like, you can go negative on health. You can use that as your window.
But aren't they
100%.
already kind of doing that? Like, the message that I've seen on healthcare is it's on their bus. Like, their negative lead on healthcare has been pretty core to their message since day one. So, like, how would you adjust
I don't think
that?
they've broken through, though, until maybe the last couple of days. And again, it's not translating yet, at least into numbers. But part of the underlying message, Scott, on their healthcare is more for you. I can't believe that tested well. I didn't actually clue into it until I really watched
I
the
hate
ad.
that fucking slogan. It's so transactional.
But
And it's
I wasn't
also
even thinking
it's so
about
easy
it, but
to
it's like,
turn, right? Like it's so easy for opponents to turn it around and turn it into an attack.
I just can't believe it tested well, and that's what they're using. I can't fathom
I think there was
that.
a mistake. I think people heard s'mores for you, and they're like, "Well, I like s'mores." So they're like,
Double chocolate.
"Awesome, it's campfire at the cottage instead of it snowing." Yeah. So I think there's an explanation.
How do we strengthen Canada's economy for the future? Job number one is to preserve the jobs and investments we already have. Unfortunately, the potential shutdown of TikTok's Canadian offices does exactly the opposite, killing hundreds of jobs and creating a chilling effect on tech investment in Canada. How much investment? An upcoming report by Nordicity estimates that TikTok Canada's day-to-day operations alone contributed $1.4 billion in GDP to Canada's economy over the last 5 years. That figure doesn't even include the economic impact from the 14 million Canadian TikTok users, including the many Canadian creators and businesses who use the app to generate income every day. All of this will be lost, however, under the federal government's order that requires TikTok to shut down its Canadian offices. It doesn't have to be this way. The Canadian government has an opportunity to protect well-paying jobs and billions in economic investment while fostering a thriving tech sector and creator economy. Facts matter. Simply put, shutting down TikTok Canada offices eliminates jobs and stymies investment in Canada. All right, let's transition over to the federal scene for a few minutes because it's Monday and we do a little bit of an extended edition of the show here on Monday. So you on our little WhatsApp group, everybody expressed an interest in talking about David Coletto, who's teasing out a poll. Now here's how desperate we are. We're not talking about polls that have been released. We're talking about people that are teasing polls they are about to release. What he has told us that he is finding in English Canada, because he said he was only starting Quebec today. So what he said he's finding in English Canada is that the Liberal vote pool is up significantly. This, for our novice listeners, is the percentage of Canadians who would consider a vote for the Liberal Party. That vote pool is up considerably. The longer the Liberal leadership race goes on, presumably primarily driven by Carney, the Conservative and NDP vote pools are down, and that 2021 Liberal voters are now coming back in about 80% numbers compared to the 50% numbers before Trudeau's resignation. So, Scott, does this fill you with joy?
Well, I don't know what it fills me with, but I mean, because David is doing a masterclass in teasing, right? He puts out a Substack, and all the Substack says is, "Oh, I opened up the cupboard, I peeked in, and there was something glowing and exciting, and they're kind of snapping the cupboard shut, and I'll come back to you later." I'm like, I want to see in the cupboard. So he's doing a great job there of getting people interested. Yeah, I am excited, and it sort of tracks with what you think you hear anecdotally, which is, I do think there's a percentage of people that have already kind of put Trudeau in the past. And it doesn't mean there isn't lots of residual anger and all that kind of stuff, but it just feels to me like there is an increase in the number of people who say, well, let's I'm so thirsty for something else, so let me just have a peek at what this Carney guy has to say. And I think particularly among certain age groups, I could see demographics, you could see people saying, I'm maybe this cat knows how to deal with this set of issues. So it does play to his strengths. I think the thing that I'm most excited about is, in my estimation, Carney has not been very pronounced. Carney has not blown anyone's socks off as a candidate in terms of his performance. So if he can up his presence, and if he can up the energy and level of execution, then maybe there's even more upside potential. So let's see what David has to say. But yeah, in a world that's been starved dry of hope for the Liberals for the past 2 years, I'll take any morsel from David Coletto's cupboard.
Deb, why does Jordan? I'm deliberately skipping past.
Yeah, I know. You can see. I want a word.
I'm deliberately managing this conversation. Deb.
Yes.
Two things. First of all, presumably we are talking about the resume of Mark Carney, not the actual Mark Carney that is sort of on the
Right.
polling questionnaires right now. For the reasons Scott said, it's impossible that anybody would have formed a strong opinion about him as a person based on the campaign to date. So, given that, why does he appear to be pulling from both the Conservatives and the NDP? And in particular, um, why would his, and this is another thing that we've seen, why would his presence drive some New Democrats to the Liberal Party and some New Democrats to the Conservative Party?
So I get to say my two favorite words, Jagmeet Singh. I mean, that's part of the answer, and people are fleeing the NDP. I'm sorry, Jordan, and I love Marat, and I'm far more pro NDP at the provincial level, but I think Jagmeet Singh has been a disaster for the New Democrats. So that's the easy answer for that piece. Carney's fresh and new. And to Scott's point, there was a hunger for an alternative if you are maybe okay with some of Poilievre's policies, but not loving Poilievre. And I think there is a group of individuals, and they tend to skew female, who are just not sure that Poilievre is the right person to replace Justin Trudeau. They know they want somebody to replace Justin Trudeau, and that seems to be happening. I continue to say the same thing about Carney, though. He's never been tested. And I really don't believe that you can transition well from high-profile private sector to high-profile public sector. And I think people underestimate how easy that shift is. And I think that's why we don't see Carney out and about talking a lot, which I think is a mistake, because they could use that time to help improve him in advance of the big leagues, the big election. I also think what is going for the Conservatives here is, once he is the leader, tying him so firmly to the anchor called Justin Trudeau will be super, super is easy, both in terms of friendship, advisory role, and quite frankly, still carbon tax. Don't believe him.
Jordan?
Yeah, I think we don't really know what the impact of Carney is going to be, because the numbers.
I know that you think I hate the NDP, Jordan, and I don't. I actually hate the Conservatives. I hate the Conservatives,
David.
I know, but listen, it's okay. We don't need your pity, We're good. But look, I think what's interesting here is that this is kind of a fascinating moment in terms of where the federal numbers are, because we're seeing that movement. But I think what we're seeing from Carney, this in some ways could be almost as good as it gets, because it's not actually Carney. It's the vision of Carney. It's like the kind of cardboard cutout. It's the hypothetical of Carney, because we haven't actually seen very much of him. He's not really doing a lot of Canadian media interviews. He's just kind of sort of popping up here and there, doing some of these short visuals, but he's not going out and doing long sit downs. So the exposure that people have had to the idea of Carney, I think it's far more about it not being Justin Trudeau, about it being somebody new. And there is a wave of enthusiasm for that. And I think some of that is sort of, there's always New Democrats will know there's always a pent up desire on the part of people to vote Liberal, right? That's always there. And so that has been a little bit unleashed there. And I would rightly expect there to be quite kind of a halo effect around that for Carney. But what I don't know is, does that sort of survive contact with the enemy, right? And so we have not yet seen the Conservatives turn paid advertising against Carney. We don't know what that is going to do. We haven't seen Carney perform significantly in a campaign-like setup. He's not doing that right now. So we're going to see more of that over the next few weeks. And I think that could potentially alter things. But look, for the NDP, their job, I think, remains the same over the medium term, which is that they need, when they look at where their vote is coming from, so they need to peel off about sort of 2/3 of their voters coming in are going to be coming from the Liberals. And then they can maybe scoop 1/3 from sort of populist right conservative, that they can maybe pull in on some affordability issues. So that's the ground that they have to go hunting in. And so the question for them is, as Carney begins to define himself, what arguments do they need to make to peel off some of those voters from the left? And as we've talked about many times before, I think there's plenty of raw material there in terms of Carney, his background, and his sort of lack of connection on a lot of the issues that are still ranking very high for Canadians, things like affordability. And also he's out there creating new vulnerabilities too. So canceling the capital gains, talking about shrinking the size of the public service, could mean service cuts. There's all kinds of stuff where the NDP is going to have some things to play with. But I think I'm reserving judgment. I think this is a moment in time. And I think that we're going to see some of those numbers shift as all of the features of the next federal race come fully into play over the next few weeks.
Tell you what I think. I think that Poilievre polarizes the electorate. And I think that he's a very polarizing figure. And I think that because of that, this election is more likely to be a head-to-head. Because I think the reason behind the dynamic I described is that people that really want to defeat Poilievre, who had been in the NDP camp under Trudeau, now see a more viable beater of Poilievre than Singh. And so they move to the Liberals. And I think that those still working class voters who remain in the NDP coalition look at the central banker and don't see what they're looking for, and they polarize on Poilievre's side. So you bleed on both sides to both parties. And I think it's partly a result of the weakness of the leader and partly a result of an inherent polarization that a person as
crisp. That's the word you're looking for.
Whatever it is. A person as insert word here, Pierre Poilievre is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's the oldest dynamic in the book in some ways for the federal NDP. A classic red door, blue door election. And that's something that they're pretty familiar with fighting. But I agree that the thing that worries me...
It's usually something that's triggered by the Liberals. In this case, it's being triggered by the Conservatives. Yeah. And I think there's a portion of the NDP. The only way to explain the dynamic, as David says, is that even you Democrats are looking at the dynamic currently on the federal landscape and saying, I'd rather take the idea of Mark Carney, as you put it, than the truth and reality and proven ability of Jagmeet Singh.
Yeah, I think today that's true. And I was just going to finish my thought. I think that the thing that concerns me is the X factor in that is sort of Singh's positives or negatives. And if I were in the federal party, what would concern me is that there's been no perceptible lift in those numbers since the end of the confidence and supply agreement. And I think that that's they need to focus on that right now in this time where it's so hard to be heard. They need to be doing some work to lift his numbers a little bit. And I think some of that needs to involve some paid in order to just seed the ground in a bit of a better place, because I think those top line numbers will shift as things actually come into contact in advance of a federal race. But you got to be ready for that. And that means taking care of your fundamentals on that level.
Very favorable, Jagmeet Singh, 8%. Very unfavorable, 26%. Anyway, there we go. All right. You know what? We may have used up
David doesn't hate the NDP. He hates the Conservatives.
He just wants them to die quietly.
He would kill the Conservatives with his hands, but the NDP he would just leave in the garage with the door down and the car running. Okay, this is...
No, the NDP just fascinate me because they're such a different political party. Like they're I see no evidence of
the hug of an anaconda here.
I see no evidence of panic. I see no evidence of internal dissension. I see no evidence of thrashing about trying to find a different approach to things. I see no attempt to do anything different. I just see them walking one step in front of the other right toward this fucking thing.
Well, I would argue that just because you don't see shifts in the strategy yet doesn't mean they're not being discussed or not happening. And then I would also point out that the Liberal Party was the party that sat back and waited to have itself be fed into a wood chipper for the last 2 years.
Well,
so
Scott and
a certain
I,
amount of fatalism seems to run in the federal scene at the moment.
Well, I know. And listen, I was weeping about it daily. All right, cursor blessing. Cursor blessing. Who wants to go?
I got a blessing for Bonnie.
All right.
I bet.
I bet
Well,
she'll take it. Yeah.
I'm a bit worried she might not be well because she's been MIA all weekend. So I don't know if it's the flu. I don't know if it's massive debate
God, I hope
prep,
she doesn't
maybe.
need ODSP.
But she's MIA. So I'm sending out a blessing to my old friend Bonnie Crombie. I've known her for many, many years, and I just hope she's well.
That is so touching. That is so touching. If you know,
The love. You can feel
Yeah,
it through the
right.
screen.
Scott,
My curse goes to Doug Ford. There's just so much news that people don't even pay attention, but only a campaign that was running at fucking 51% would consciously piss a day away on the fucking tunnel under the 401. This is a crackpot, bad science fiction story, just like Amazing Stories from 1935. Doug Ford for like 22 kilometers, right? And for like tens of billions of dollars is going to ask what Metrolinx, who's done such a great job on the crosstown, he's going to ask them to like bore a hole under the 401. This is where we're putting our dollars, not on healthcare, not on education, not on ODSP. We're going to build a tunnel under the 401. These guys it will go straight up or straight down. It won't even go across. This is just fuckery of the highest order. It's like every once in a while, Ford gets stuck in these things. He wants a Ferris wheel in a casino on the waterfront. He wants a tunnel under the 401. He wants an elevator to the moon. Like, it's fucking dumb and weird and crazy.
I think it's unfair of you, Scott, to put a price tag on that tunnel because Doug Ford has no idea how much it will cost.
And yet, there he is, announcing it like it's a real thing on a campaign.
All right, I've learned my lesson. I know I'm the new one here, but apparently you don't go first, you go last.
Well, no, apparently not.
Lesson learned, so I could refute Scott.
Because Scott stole mine, because that is 100%. I could not agree more. And I guess, so this is a curse going out to Ford, and I'll pick a different lane. But yeah, let the record reflect that in an affordability focused moment that dumping $60 billion on a fictitious tunnel seems unwise at minimum. And I hope he continues to make more announcements like that. But the other curse I was going to throw to him was Ford was out over the weekend shitting all over the federal government for not having the fake fentanyl SAR in place yet. Him and Danielle Smith were out there holding hands.
Ford recommended Hillier.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
Can't really think of anyone we should put in charge of sensitive things more than that guy, boy. I guess it worked out so well for $20,000.
What happened to the cash he got paid for the immunization thing?
Just a cool $20,000 a month for that. So you can look forward to that, taxpayers of Ontario, that Yahoo in charge of anything remotely important. Yeah, so I think that stuff, Ford is falling on the wrong line of agreeing with Trump and being seen to work against sort of in the national interest and whatever the hell's going on. It's a vulnerability. And I think that frankly, it's also just a dumb thing to do when he's about to be the one going down to Washington. He's signaling in some sense that the Canadians are not upholding their side of the bargain with the crazy man. So I thought it was a shitty thing to do on his part in terms of the national interest. And I thought it was an unwise thing to do politically as well.
Excellent. All right. My, I guess, I don't know whether it's a curse or a blessing, just a thought that goes out to the Freeland campaign, which is, I don't know what you're going to do about this, but it's over unless you change it. And there's such a strong consensus that the public debate's now moved on to whether who's going to be the Liberal leader, and it's assumed that Mark Carney's going to be the Liberal leader, and pollsters are operating on that assumption, and analysts are working on that assumption, and that whole dynamic is just deadly and fatal to you, and it is you have to thread a needle. Because you can't really go negative on an inter-party fight. Nobody wants that. It doesn't work out. On the other hand, you need very quickly, instead of just telling people what would be good about you, you need to tell people why not Carney. You need to give people a reason, Liberals a reason not to support Carney. And if you don't do it soon, this thing is, well, it is already effectively over. So I don't even care when you do it, but you have to do that. I mean, the onus is now on Freeland to establish that Carney's not the right person. So,
David, can I send
Yeah.
out one other quick little blessing?
sure.
It's my mom's 75th birthday today. and she's a
Holy
listener.
liver!
Hey,
So,
hey.
just wanted to send out a big happy birthday. And thank you for always being such a fan.
Hey, Jordan's mom. Thank you for raising such a great human being.
Happy birthday, Mama Jordan.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, that's our show for today. I want to thank our original presenting sponsor, TELUS, CN, Aurea, TikTok Canada, and our polling sponsor, Enbridge. I want to thank all of you at Kirst who watched or listened, and of course, Jordan and Deb and Scott for getting up so bright and early with me in the morning. Thanks, and we'll see you again tomorrow with more of this, whatever it was. See you then.